You remember that Francis, sitting to the right of where I am now, spoke of her brother-in-law who wanted to do something that I didn't understand. I think I understood he wanted to caterwaul, but I'm sure you didn't mean that. What?
Put on sound wall, the filing.
Oh, now, well, I don't know much better now, but it's all right. Yeah. At any rate, she had some sort of a difference of opinion, perhaps a little altercation with her brother-in-law, and she claims that she handled it well, and I agree with her. She handled the situation very well, but I will discuss the manner in which she termed and phrased the statement she made. She said, I had no temper on that occasion. More than that, I had no symptoms. Well, I am certain that Frances is competent to state that she had no symptoms. Symptoms she certainly had to notice, especially if she looked for them, and she would have had them, she would have noticed them. But if she says that she had no temper, that's something else. Whether she knows that, I am not certain. It's remarkable that anybody should not develop temper when he is provoked. When he is confronted with something that displeases him, that riles him, that irritates him. And I presume that Frances was irritated by whatever her brother-in-law meant to do. Otherwise, she wouldn't have had a story to report here. And so we conclude Frances developed temper because she was irritated. What she should have said was, I had no sustained temper. The temper was there merely in a flare, not in a violent effect, and with no after effect. Well, you know, this is something that my patients will do very well to ponder. I doubt whether 5 minutes pass in my life when I don't develop angry temper, because I have yet to see the 5 minutes of my busy life when I don't have irritation, either at home from the children or in my office from these other children that I call my patients. And they are my children, be sure. That's how I feel towards them. They feel to me as children towards their father, and I am very happy about it. And there are very few fathers who, being with their children at a certain age of the children, don't get irritated by them, especially if they are boys. And there are very few fathers who don't get irritated by the children very frequently if the children have not passed the teen age. Well, I can't enlarge on this subject, But be certain that I, confronted with those of my children that are my patients, am irritated very frequently, and I have not exaggerated when I stated that there are no 5 minutes passing in my office in which I don't have irritation. Well, patients don't always cooperate, and even if they do cooperate, they don't accept. They cause me trouble in my effort to get them well. So I am frustrated, and frustration is irritation, and irritation causes temper, angry temper. And so when I am in my office, I am practically always in temper, but I hope you haven't noticed it. I hope that I have had the skill to conceal it. This means to stop it the moment it flares. But there's always flare. It flares up very frequently. And what Francis spoke of was the flare phase. That phase of temper that we call the flaring up. There you can immediately hold it down. If you watch it, if you stop the flare. But once the flare passes into an expressed temper, into a temper which you cast in the shape of a sentence, once you say, stop that. Why do you do that? Don't you know any better? You don't explode them, but you put your anger into the proper words, and moreover into the proper intonation. This thing is no longer the flare, the temper flare. This is the temperamental effect. And we call it the immediate temperamental effect. Once you do that, once you pass from the temper flare to the immediate temperamental outburst or effect, then in all likelihood you have now started a chain of reaction. You now will pass into the after effect of your temperamental experience, and now you will begin to rave and to argue and to shout. I stop here. I know that my patients don't strike out, but they shout, they yell, they argue. As most people do when they pass into the after effect. And as the after effect goes on and the argument stops, the after effect remains, and the person that provoked you may no longer be present, the person may have departed, but now comes the inner after effect in which you fret, in which you still dwell on this bitter experience that you have, and in which you now rail against the person that provoked you without using words. You rail inside against him. And that may go on for hours. And you may inside you have the feeling that this person dealt you a blow, that he gave you a dirty deal. Maybe you think precisely in these terms. And you will now crave to come back at him on the next occasion when you meet him again. And then you will tell him a piece of your mind. And you get everything that you have on your chest off your chest and throw it at him. And this after effect, the silent after effect that proceeds inside you, may go on for endless periods of time, for hours, for days, and for weeks sometimes. And that's the most dangerous portion of the temperamental cycle. And you will understand now that this temperamental cycle begins with the flare, then passes on to the immediate effect, then to the after effect, which first works in your consciousness, or at any rate in the open, in the form of words spoken, and later gradually sinks down to the level where no words are spoken, but thoughts are formed inside. Now this thing that we call the flare, the flaring up of the temper, is unavoidable where there are irritations. Unless you are dull, and for Frances particularly, I know she is nothing of the kind. And since she is not dull, she experienced that flare up of the temper. But she has been trained to stop that while it is still flaring and has not developed yet into a spoken immediate effect. And at that time it's easy to stop it as a temper flare, and to hold it down. This means to refuse to give it expression. And how do you do that? How are you going to hold down a temper even if it is still in the flare stage? And Frances has learned that. You saw what she did while she sat here on the platform. When she recounted this story of her encounter with her brother-in-law, she laughed or smiled all through the narrative. Of course, you may say it's easy now to laugh and smile at a past temper outburst, but this smiling was precisely the means with which she approached her temper flare. The temper flared up. She immediately spotted it as something that we call temper, and now she knew in a fraction of a second that it is ridiculous to let temper rise and express itself. And this thought that I have in my mind that something is ridiculous, we can call the inner smile. The inner smile. You don't have to smile at temper or at anything else, but you do smile if you have the thought planted in your brain at this moment that the reaction is ridiculous, and that's what we call the inner, unarticulated, unspoken smile. The smile is neither expressed, or the laugh, neither expressed in a, let me say, in a joke that is spoken, nor in the features that produce a laugh, but it's simply an inner reaction in which you feel or say to yourself, that is ridiculous. So keep the word in mind. That is the internal smile to plant at a certain moment the thought in your brain, that is ridiculous. If you declare something ridiculous, your own reaction, if you declare it as ridiculous, then you don't take it seriously. And there is never an anger that is not taken seriously. Once you have an anger and you experience it and you express it, that means in itself you are now very serious about the insult that you have suffered. If you don't take a reaction seriously, then it cannot be temper. Temper and not be taken seriously don't go together. So if you begin to say that my temper, my present temper is ridiculous, You abolish it. You throw it out of your existence. If you really mean that it is ridiculous. You see, not to take things seriously means not to fear them, not to be embarrassed by them, not to get angry at them. You see, all these expressions, fear, anger, worry, and so forth, embarrassment, mean that you take something seriously. And if you want to get rid of it, form the idea, the belief in your brain that this whole reaction is ridiculous. And that's why patients in recovery are constantly indoctrinated in the manner of telling them that temper is nothing but infantile, childish, and unreal reaction. And once you spot it as such, then you ridicule it, and you don't take it seriously, then it disappears. And that's the experience that Frances had. She didn't know that for sure. I am fairly certain that she didn't know much of this statement that I made here, that if you don't take a thing seriously, a danger, a worry, an embarrassment, then it disappears. I can state that because I don't remember having spoken of this subject frequently, and maybe I never spoke of it, although I have written about it. Now, this thing that we call the flare-up of temper is unavoidable. It is our nature. The moment we feel a provocation that our temper flares, and I said that's our nature, and you can't get rid of your nature. And Frances' example illustrates this situation very clearly. After I told you that there can be no doubt, but she experienced the flare. She wasn't aware of it, but there can be no doubt about that. Yet we know she experienced it and acted correctly on it. She immediately spotted it as nothing but temper, and to her that means you don't have to take your reaction seriously. And perhaps she thought precisely of these words and this phrasing, but I doubt it. She simply had learned it. It's now at her fingertips not to take seriously anything that starts as a temper. And once I have learned a reaction or a knowledge to the extent that it is now at my fingertips, I do it mechanically without any thought entering into the performance, and I do it intuitively without thinking about what I do. And that's the stage which Frances has reached. That's a very desirable state. It's almost an ideal state. Once you have this ridiculing reaction, this means this inner smile at your fingertips, then you can apply it any time and every time. And once you reach that stage, there is no danger of you developing symptoms. And you remember that Frances, who knows the recovery philosophy as well as anybody would know it, maybe I should accept myself, but I have caught myself falling short of this knowledge too. Frances, who has acquired this highly desirable knowledge, doesn't even have to spot anymore. I am sure she will substantiate this statement of mine. And if I should describe to you what kind of a temper Frances used to have, well, you will not believe it. For weeks in the beginning when I began to take care of her. I don't know how many weeks. I'm afraid it was only 1 or 2 weeks. Let me say 4 weeks without specifying the number. She was in a continuous panic, not only in fear, not only in temper, in irritation, but in a continuous panic. It was not the panic of the type where you strike out and rush and run and yell and throw hysterics. Not that type. But she could never relax. She was always apprehensive. And that went on for years. For years, not for months. Finally, she came to me. I couldn't have helped her if I had seen her in my office only. Because if I treat a case of continuous panic, or call it of continuous apprehension in the office alone, I have to wait and work slowly. In the office I can't work fast. It takes time till the patient really gets proper instruction from me in the office. It takes months and months till I can convey to the patient as much instruction as I have, for instance, deposited in my book. And the patient is then still in the panic and doesn't get relief, so he drops out. A patient like Francis, treated in the office, only would have dropped out after a week or 2. That always is the picture of a patient who constantly suffers and is treated in the office only. But Frances did something that all of you, I hope, have done. First of all, she studied immediately my literature, and there she got so much instruction that she could get at home. She didn't have to wait till I would have time to give it to her. And she improved rapidly. And then she came to these classes. In the classes, it's not necessary for the patient to get much instruction, although they get it, and you get it. In the classes, it's sufficient for the patient to see that somebody who had a similar suffering got well or improved because he gave up the fear of collapse or any idea of danger. Then he felt secure, and he could feel secure because he now saw, or Frances now saw, that there was hope for her. Previous to coming to classes, she didn't know that there was anybody in this world that suffered the same condition. Now she knew there are others, and they get well. Previous to coming to classes, she was hopeless. She felt hopeless. She was in utmost despair. Now when she saw that she was not the only one in the world that had such a condition, and that other patients whom she saw here and who told her what I am telling you, that other patients actually get cured of this continuous apprehensiveness and panic. Now she breathed freely. She discarded her fear or part of her fear. She knew then that she was no longer doomed forever, and that there was a good chance for her to do what the other patients had done, to get well. But getting well does not mean to lose one's nature. Frances had been in continuous fear before I have seen her, and before she came to recovery, and continuously irritated by herself and by others, for instance, by her children. Be sure children are irritating, little children particularly. And so she was in a continuous anger too, particularly anger about herself, disgust with herself, this inner temper. And of course, she could not throw that out of her system. She could only change it, control it, hold it down, and make it a very mild reaction. But the flare she could never get rid of. That is definitely nature. And nature you can't throw out of your organization. But you will now understand that what Frances told you was this. She lost that part of temper that is expressed in words or in action, the immediate temperamental effect. And she lost that other part of temper that may be expressed in words or buried inside, but working on there, the after effect. But the flare remains and will remain for all her life. But she has learned how to spot it and not to take it seriously. This means she counteracts the temper flare with the inner smile. And I hope you will understand this situation now, and that you will do what Frances does. And that does not merely require that you go home now and make up your mind, I'll be another Frances. That will not help you. What it means is that you must practice and learn how to do it. And both practice and learning, real learning, requires time. And will you please see to it that you don't get discouraged because you have to wait. At the end of the waiting period, there is the great reward, the prize. And will you please wait till you get the same reward and the same prize that Frances got. Thank you.